Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. We're reviewing an older DVD that probably got released somewhere around 2010. This is the Mr. Perfect DVD. Mr. Perfect is a WWE Hall of Famer. He was inducted in 2007, which I believe would make that around WrestleMania 24, I believe, in Orlando. I'm not sure what class that he went into, but honestly, as I was watching this DVD, I was watching the documentary. I was sort of rethinking something that I can remember from the Wrestling Observer podcast when Dave Meltzer was talking about the Owen Hart DVD, and basically thought that maybe WWE was trying to squeeze some money out of a bad situation by releasing a DVD on Owen Hart, because they sort of put it as, there are these wrestlers out there that have these tragic endings to their lives, like Brian Pillman, Mr. Perfect, Owen Hart. These guys all got DVDs, and I'm not saying that these three guys were not, the most interesting or the most entertaining or the best wrestlers in their class, but it's just, WWE doesn't release DVDs on all of their past superstars. They sort of just pick ones. And I'm not going to say that the Mr. Perfect DVD wasn't one of the best of all times. Just, to me, it seemed like there was a whole lot of holes in this story. They really told the story of Mr. Perfect growing up in a wrestling family. Him, his father being a star up in the AWA in the Minnesota area. Curt saying that he wanted to get into wrestling, and then him and his dad teaming up, and they sort of got started wrestling in Portland, and then, Curt got a chance to go work for the WWF, but it ended up sort of just being in a situation where he was a job guy. So he ended up leaving the company before he sort of got stuck in that role, going and wrestling in the AWA, and ended up challenging Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA Championship before becoming the champion. By the time, that Vince thought it was time to bring back Curt Hennig, he'd already gotten over the fact that he was a really, really good wrestler. And he came into the company, I believe, around the time of WrestleMania 5. He has the match against Blue Blazer. That was really the first time that I ever got the chance to see Curt Hennig, Mr. Perfect. And I can honestly tell you that from watching Superstars, watching Challenge, watching a lot of these sort of like jobber show matches where you get to see your favorite superstar go in there and just sort of beat somebody up and have a short little 2-3 minute match. I sort of fell in love with Mr. Perfect and really thought that he was a really, really good wrestler. This was really capped off by the match he had against Bret Hart at SummerSlam 1991. I've always said that SummerSlam 1991 is one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time. And one of the reasons is how good that match is. Plus, you get the wedding of Macho Man, you get Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior teaming up. A really good opener with a really weird six-man tag. The teaming of the Texas Tornado, Ricky Steamboat, and the British Bulldog. And plus you got the Boss Man against the Mountie and the loser goes to jail match. Lots of cool stuff going on in there. But, Mr. Perfect is a really good wrestler. You just got to wonder if he's really one of the ones that really deserved to get a documentary. And I think over the next, period of time, I think I'll be watching the Brian Pillman one next to sort of see how that one lives up, over time. I can tell you that I love Mr. Perfect. He was a really good wrestler. But this documentary to me really sort of had holes in it. I mean, they talk about the fact of him being in the Heenan family. They talk about him, winning the Intercontinental title. I can remember that he beat Tito Santana and I believe a Intercontinental Championship tournament shortly after WrestleMania 6 when Ultimate Warrior, he won the Ultimate Challenge and he let the Intercontinental title go. They really showed just the last few seconds of that match, and I don't know if it was because what Bobby Heenan's health was like when this was out. Not very many, if any, that I can remember Bobby Heenan quotes talking about what it was like to manage Curt Hennig. Sort of weird to look back on it now. Of course, you always get the same talking heads. You got Bruce Pritchard, you got the Brooklyn Brawler. In this one, we have Mr. Perfect's son. Of course, the WWE wrestler. What the heck's his name? Curtis Axel. There you go, the Axeman. I always get mixed up because I try to think of that name that he had, McGillicuddy, when he was in NXT. We talk about the fact of him coming in, him winning the Intercontinental Championship. He held it for a long time. Brett talks about the match at SummerSlam 91 where he had hurt his back. But he still wanted to work the match, and he still gave Brett one of the best matches of his career. From there, they basically say that Perfect had to take a step back. He joined the commentating table. He ended up finding a really good role where he would be out there with Vince and Jim Ross most of the time. They put over some of the best lines that he ever had when he was talking on the commentating table. And then talk about the fact that Bobby Heenan couldn't be the manager of Ric Flair, and then he moved into the role of being the manager of Ric Flair, living on it. They don't really talk about his comeback to wrestling at all. They don't talk about him wrestling in like 93 on Monday Night Raw. They don't talk about him wrestling against Ric Flair in that retirement match. They don't talk about him coming back and wrestling in that sort of match where he turned on Flair. That would be the sort of forgettable Survivor Series where he ended up replacing the Ultimate Warrior, and ended up being Macho Man and Perfect teaming up against the Razor Ramon and Ric Flair. They don't talk about that at all, honestly, and that's one of the things that's really sort of weird. Maybe they don't want to bring up the whole HGH deal. If this would have came in around 2010, it would have been the time that they would have been trying to get back in the good graces of the Ultimate Warrior, because they really thought he was going to get into the Hall of Fame at WrestleMania 26. And that's one of the reasons why DiBiase ended up being the main eventer. But maybe they just didn't want to bring all that stuff back up again. They talk about the fact that he goes and he manages Triple H, putting him over and sort of giving him that sort of perfect gimmick before the phone calls. And basically, it was Eric Bischoff wanting to bring him into WCW. He ended up coming in, and possibly one of the biggest mistakes I can think of in WCW is that he joins the Four Horsemen and ends up taking Arn Anderson's spot, teaming with Ric Flair in a lot of tag matches. He ends up going into War Games, where he ends up turning on the Horsemen, joining the NWO, where he would go on and have a few good matches against Ric Flair. But honestly, in my opinion, that was one of the last runs of the Horsemen, and I think the Horsemen would have been much better if they would have had Curt Hennig in that role rather than Dean Malenko. Not saying that Malenko was a bad Horseman or anything like that, but I just think that Hennig fit the role better. They talk about him being United States champion. They talk about him doing the whole Rapist crap deal. And they ended up with him, coming back and wrestling in 2002 for WWE, returning at the Royal Rumble, which, they talk about him coming in and doing a little bit of a run. Then immediately they get into the time of talking about his death, and they say that, in April of 2002 is when he found his release, which means he was only with the company for 3 months. And within a year, he's wrestling independent dates, and that's when they find him dead, I believe. And I thought it was Puerto Rico, but the thing said it was in Miami, I believe. So it was in the United States. Then you get all the people talking about the shock of him being dead. Wade Boggs, his personal friend, is talking about the fact that he really thought that it's his fault, because if Curt would have called him, he could have talked to him and he could have helped him through any hard times that he was having. Perfect will always go down as one of the best wrestlers that there's ever been in the sport of professional wrestling. But I'm just really not sure that this DVD knocked it out of the park for Curt Hennig.